Imagine for a moment being able to um, visualize something invisible.
Yeah, like seeing exactly how a magnetic pulse from outside the skull.
Right. How it creates an electrical field inside the brain and, influences activity.
It sounds incredibly complex, maybe a bit sci-fi even.
It does. But that's exactly what we're diving into today. The world of transcranial magnetic stimulation simulation. TMS simulation.
It's this powerful computational approach. Takes all sorts of data about a person.
And let's researchers model that whole interaction digitally. We've gathered your source material, which lays out this really fascinating process step by step.
Yeah, it breaks it down quite nicely.
And our mission for this deep dive, using these insights, is really to get why simulating TMS is so important.
Right, it's about seeing that magnetic field interaction clearly.
Understanding the sort of underlying mechanisms.
Figuring out better treatment protocols.
And ultimately moving towards, like, truly personalized therapies. That's the goal here.
Exactly. And the way it's approached, according to the material, it's like building something complex piece by piece.
A multi-stage process.
Yeah, starting with creating a digital twin of the person's head.
Yeah.
Well, it's absolutely foundational for everything else.
Okay, so let's jump right into that first stage then. Creating this realistic head model, this digital twin. Why is getting this detailed map so critical right at the start?
Well, what's key is that the electric field induced by TMS,
Yeah.
and that's the bit that actually interacts with your neurons, right?
Right, the E field.
It depends highly on the exact geometry, the shape, and the electrical properties of all those different tissues in the head.
Ah, okay. So like the brain itself, the skull, scalp, the fluids.
Precisely. They all conduct electricity differently. They all have unique shapes in each person. So without an accurate map of that whole landscape, you just can't predict how the magnetic field translates into that crucial electrical field inside.
Okay, that makes sense. You need this incredibly detailed map. So
Hmm.
how do you actually start building this digital twin in the simulation? Where does the raw data come from?
It starts with data acquisition, actually quite similar to clinical practice. The standard way uses high-resolution structural MRI scans,
MRI. Okay.
specifically T1-weighted images, and often T2-weighted ones too.
Hmm.
These are really the gold standard for capturing that intricate anatomical detail you need.
So the MRI gives you the picture, like the raw anatomy, but the simulation needs to know what kind of material each bit of that picture is.
Right. How do you go from just an image to knowing this is skull, this is brain?
That's the next really crucial step. Image segmentation.
Yeah.
The MRI scans get processed to differentiate between all those various tissue types.
Okay.
So things like the scalp, the bone of the skull, the cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF that
Ugh.
cushions the brain, gray matter where lots of computation happens, and white matter, which is more like the brain's wiring.
All identified separately. Exactly. Each gets identified. And this is vital because, like we said, each one has its own unique electrical conductivity value. The sources stress that the accuracy of this segmentation is absolutely critical for the simulation to be realistic.
I can see why, if you get the conductivity wrong, the E-field calculation will be off.
Totally. Garbage in, garbage out, basically.
Okay, so you've got the high-res scan, you've segmented it into different tissue types with their properties. What's the next technical step to turn that into something the computer can actually, run physics simulations on?
Right. Then you move to mesh generation. You create a 3D volumetric mesh from those segmented images.
A mesh, like a net?
Sort of, yeah. A common technique for this is the finite element method, or FEM.
FEM, okay. Heard of that.
Think of FEM as taking a really complex, irregular shape like the human head and dividing it up into thousands, maybe even millions, of smaller, simpler geometric elements.
Like little building blocks.
Exactly. Often tiny pyramid-like shapes called tetrahedra. The computer can then solve the complex physical equations, like Maxwell's equations we'll get to, across all these many simple elements. It approximates the solution for the whole complex structure that way.
Okay, so breaking down the complex geometry into bite-sized computational pieces makes the physics calculations actually possible.
Precisely.
Are there specific software tools that researchers typically use for this whole anatomy to mesh process?
Yes, definitely. The sources highlight SimNIBS quite a bit.
SimNIBS?
Yeah, it's popular, it's open source, and it's designed to automate a lot of this, taking the MRI data, handling segmentation, handling meshing. It's considered pretty accessible.
That's helpful.
Another tool mentioned is SPM, statistical parametric mapping. It's well known for other brain imaging analyses, and its segmentation algorithms can sometimes be used as a preliminary step before maybe using other software for the meshing itself.
Okay, interesting. So there are dedicated tools to streamline this complex modeling stage. Fantastic.
Hmm.
So stage one is complete. We've built this incredibly detailed digital twin of an individual's head, mapped out all the tissues, their electrical properties, broken it down into a mesh for computation. What comes next?
Okay, so now we need to introduce the source of the stimulation itself. Stage 2 is all about modeling the TMS coil and then, crucially, calculating the electric field it induces within that realistic head model we just built.
Right, because you mentioned earlier, it's not the magnetic fields from the coil that directly excites neurons.
Exactly. It's the electric field it induces. That's the key player at the neural level.
So what does the simulation need to know about the coil to model it accurately?
It needs a precise digital model of the specific coil being used. This includes details about its shape. Is it a figure-of-8 coil, which is common, or a simpler circular one?
Okay.
Its size, and even the specific pattern of its electrical windings, that all affects the magnetic field it generates.
Wow, that detail.
Yeah, but thankfully, most simulation software packages, like SimNIBS again, often come with pre-built models for a lot of the standard commercial coils. So researchers don't always have to, build that part from scratch.
That saves some effort. And just like in a real TMS session, where you place the coil and how you angle it must be super important. How's that handled in the simulation?
Oh, absolutely critical. Coil positioning needs to be defined precisely in the simulation. You basically tell the software exactly where the coil is located and how it's oriented relative to that digital head model.
Mimicking the real setup.
Exactly, mimicking how you'd position it on a real person's scalp. And what's really neat, the sources mention, is that if clinicians use neuronavigation systems for placement accuracy in a real TMS session,
Like those GPS systems for the brain.
kind of, yeah. The coordinates recorded by those systems can often be directly imported into the simulation software.
Oh, that's a great link. Connecting the simulation directly to the clinical procedure.
It really is. It helps ensure the simulation matches what was actually done.
Okay, so we have digital head, the digital coil, positioned just right. Now for the big physics calculation, right?
Mhm.
Finding that crucial electric field inside the brain.
This is where the fundamental physics comes in. Using the detailed head model and the coil model, the software goes to work solving Maxwell's equations of electromagnetism.
Ah, the famous Maxwell's equations.
Yep, those are the foundational equations describing how electric and magnetic fields behave and interact. By solving them within the specific context of that head's geometry and all those different tissue conductivities.
The simulation computes the E-field distribution.
Precisely. The precise distribution of the induced electric field throughout the brain volume. And this, as the sources emphasize, is where it gets really interesting because that E field isn't just some abstract calculation.
It's the direct cause.
It's the direct cause of a change in the resting membrane potential of the neurons. So this E field value, its strength and direction at any point in the brain, that's the key quantity we're ultimately after in this stage. It's the direct link between the external magnetic pulse and the potential for neural activation.
That's fascinating, the direct link between the calculated physics and the potential biological effect at the neuron level. Highlights the need for precision, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Small errors in the head model or coil position can lead to significant differences in the calculated E field.
Makes sense. What software tools are typically used for this specific E-field modeling part?
Well, SimNIBS comes up again as a primary tool here. It's known for calculating the E field with high precision.
And it has visualization tools too, you said.
Yeah, powerful visualization tool. So you can actually see where the field is predicted to be strongest within the brain model, which is incredibly useful.
Right.
Another tool mentioned is SlicerTMS. It's also open source and apparently offers more real-time visualization capabilities.
Real time. So you could potentially move the virtual coil and see the E-field change.
That's the idea, yeah. Which could be particularly useful for things like interactive treatment planning, trying out different spots virtually.
Very cool. Okay, so we've progressed quite a bit. We've built the digital head, modeled the coil, calculated the precise electric field it induces everywhere in that digital brain. But knowing the E-field intensity, the sources say that's only part of the story.
Exactly. It's a critical part, but it's the trigger, not the whole response.
So the next stage takes us deeper into the neuroscience, simulating the actual neural response.
Right. The big question now is, How do the neurons and the networks they form actually react to that calculated E field? This is stage 3. And it's noted as perhaps the most complex and also the most rapidly evolving area in TMS simulation right now.
I can imagine. Brains are complicated. How do researchers even begin to tackle simulating that neural response?
hmm
Are they looking at single neurons or bigger networks?
They're doing both, actually. And these approaches give different kinds of insights. One approach is single neuron modeling.
Okay.
This uses really detailed, biophysically realistic models of individual neurons, sometimes called compartmental models.
Compartmental.
Yeah, they break the neuron down into different electrical compartments: soma, dendrites, axon. These models simulate how the calculated E field at that neuron's location changes its membrane potential.
And whether it's enough to make it fire.
Exactly, whether it triggers an action potential. These models often incorporate very detailed neuron shapes, their morphology, and they're often based on principles like cable theory to understand how electrical signals travel along the neuron structure.
Wow. So you can simulate if one specific virtual neuron sitting in a particular spot with a certain E field hitting it
Why?
would actually activate.
Pretty much, yeah. It gives you that fine-grained view. But, as you know, the brain isn't just isolated neurons floating
It's
around.
all connected.
It's a massively interconnected network. So the other approach is network-level modeling. This shifts the focus to simulating interconnected groups of neurons or even larger-scale brain networks.
Okay, so zooming out a bit.
Right. These simulations explore the kind of broader impact of TMS. They ask questions like, how does stimulating one specific target area influence the activity of brain regions that are far away but connected through white matter tracks?
Ah, the downstream effect.
Exactly. Or how do different TMS protocols like the frequency or pattern of the pulses affect the overall network dynamics, or even processes like synaptic plasticity?
Plasticity.
Yeah.
The brain changing its connections.
Which is fundamental for things like learning, memory, and potentially therapeutic effects, too.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge leap in complexity, simulating network interactions and plasticity. What kind of software or toolboxes are used for these really intricate neural simulations?
Yeah, it is complex. For models specifically looking at how the E field interacts with detailed single neurons, TMS is mentioned. That's an open source MATLAB toolbox. And then for building and simulating more generalized custom models of neurons or neural networks, there are powerful, more general purpose simulation environments like Neuron and Genesis. These are really flexible tools used widely in computational neuroscience.
Right, so specialized tools for bridging the E field to the neuron and more general platforms for broader network modeling.
Correct. It depends on the specific question the researchers are asking.
Okay, so we've gone from the digital anatomy to the physics of the coil and E field, now into simulating how individual neurons and potentially whole networks might respond. Is there a final stage? Does it try to connect all this simulation work back to something we can actually, see or measure in a person?
Yes, absolutely. That's stage 4, and the source material describes it as the final frontier, essentially, predicting physiological and cognitive outcomes.
The final frontier. Okay.
This is all about bridging those simulated changes in neural activity, the firing patterns, the network dynamics, to observable results.
Like what, for example?
Well, relatively simple things like a muscle twitch evoked from stimulating the motor cortex, that's called a motor evoked potential, or MEP, or much more complex things like predicting an improvement in depressive symptoms after a course of TMS treatment.
Wow. Okay. Predicting symptom improvement from a simulation. That sounds incredibly challenging.
It absolutely is, and the source material is very clear about this, stating it remains a significant challenge.
Why is it so hard?
Well, think about the sheer complexity of brain function, how much variability there is between individuals even beyond anatomy, and just how intricate the link is between neural activity patterns and complex behaviors or subjective experiences like mood. It's a massive gap to bridge.
Yeah, no kidding. So even with that huge challenge, what kind of useful insights can simulations provide at this stage? How do researchers use them if predicting, say, depression scores is still out of reach?
That's a good question. Even though predicting complex behaviors perfectly is hard, the simulations still offer really crucial insights and, importantly, validation steps.
Validation. How so?
Well, for instance, researchers frequently correlate the strength and the location of the simulated E field in the motor cortex with experimentally measured MEPs, those muscle twitches we mentioned.
Oh, okay.
If their simulation predicts a strong E field in the hand area of the motor cortex, and they actually measure a large MEP in the corresponding hand muscle when they stimulate that spot in reality.
Then it gives them confidence that the model is doing something right.
Exactly. It helps validate and refine the head model, the coil model, the E field calculation. It's a way to ground the simulation in something directly measurable, even if it's a relatively simple physiological response.
That makes a lot of sense. Use something you can measure reliably, like an MEP, to check the accuracy of the earlier stages of your simulation before trying to predict something harder.
Precisely. It builds confidence in the underlying physics and anatomical modeling.
Are there other examples of how simulations connect to observable measures?
Yes, the material also brings up brain oscillations. TMS is known to be able to alter the brain's natural rhythmic electrical activity. Things like alpha waves, beta waves, gamma waves.
Right, the signals you see in an EEG.
Exactly. And these oscillations are linked to various cognitive functions. So, simulating how a specific TMS protocol might impact these oscillations is an active area of research. Often, this is done alongside real-world EEG recordings during TMS, something called TMS EEG co-registration.
So trying to match the simulated effect on brain rhythms with the actual measured changes in ED signals.
It's another way to try and connect the simulation, the E field, and the predicted neural response to an observable physiological signal from the brain.
Okay, so putting all together now, we've really followed this fascinating journey. Started with building that detailed digital twin of the head, segmenting all the tissues, making the computational mesh,
And then modeling the TMS coil, solving Maxwell's equations to map out that crucial E field distribution.
then diving into the neural realm, simulating how individual neurons might fire, how networks might react.
And finally, trying to bridge that gap, however challenging, to predicting observable outcomes, validating with things like MEPs or comparing with EEG changes.
What's the big takeaway then from your sources about the overall value of this incredibly multifaceted simulation process?
The material really emphasizes that simulating TMS is this powerful integration. You've got medical imaging for the anatomy, you've got physics for the electromagnetics, and you've got computational neuroscience for the neural responses.
Bringing it all together.
Exactly. And by bringing these fields together through simulation, researchers are gaining, well, really unprecedented insights into exactly how TMS interacts with an individual's brain.
And the ultimate goal.
The ultimate goal, as highlighted again and again, is using these insights to pave the way for more effective and crucially more personalized treatments for a whole range of neurological and psychiatric conditions. It's
Yeah.
about moving beyond a kind of one-size-fits-all approach.
Towards treatment truly tailored to an individual's specific brain anatomy and potentially physiology.
That's the vision, yeah.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it? How much complex computational work and deep scientific understanding goes into simulating something that, from the outside, might just look like placing a device on someone's head.
It really is.
This deep dive certainly reveals the incredibly detailed scientific process that's aiming to make this potentially powerful technique much more precise and hopefully more impactful for patients.
It truly does. It underscores the complexity, absolutely, but also the immense potential that simulation holds for guiding and optimizing these kinds of therapies in the future.
And that leads us perfectly into a final thought for you, our listeners, to maybe ponder. Given that significant challenge we discussed in stage 4, reliably predicting those complex, observable outcomes like actual symptom improvement, what might the next really big breakthrough in simulation need to look like? Perhaps it involves combining these physics-based and neural models with other types of data, maybe genetic information, maybe detailed behavioral data. What will it take, do you think, to truly unlock the potential for fully personalizing brain therapies based on these sophisticated models? Something to think about.